Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Universe. Tonight we are going to tell you the entire story of the Titanic, slowly, gently, from the first quiet sketches of her hull to the stillness that surrounds her now, resting in the dark far below the waves. We will walk through the great age of ocean liners, when ships were the largest moving things ever built, and crossing the Atlantic was still a kind of wonder. We will meet the people who built her, the people who sailed on her, and the people who waited for her on the other side of the sea. There is no need to remember any of it. There is no need to hold on to a single name or number. Just let the story move through you like a tide, slow and warm, while the world outside your window goes quiet. So let your breathing slow, let the day settle quietly behind you and drift with us now, back to the age of great ocean liners. Our story begins not with the Titanic herself, but with the world that made her possible, a world of coal, smoke, and steam, of grand companies racing to build the fastest and finest ships afloat. Before we meet her steel and her rivets, let's drift back to the years just after the turn of the 20th century, when the ocean was the only road between Europe and America, and the great shipping lines competed for the hearts of travelers the way nations once competed for empires. Picture the world at the start of the 1900s, when the only way to cross the Atlantic Ocean was by sea, and the journey took the better part of a week no matter how much money you had. Wealthy travelers, hopeful emigrants, and everyone in between shared the same rolling horizon of gray water, because no bridge and no aircraft yet existed to shorten the distance between the old world and the new one. Shipping companies understood that whoever built the grandest, most reassuring vessels would win not just fares, but a kind of quiet trust from the public. So through the 1890s and into the new century, a gentle rivalry grew between the great steamship lines, each one trying to outdo the last with taller funnels, softer cabins, and smoother crossings. It was, in its own unhurried way, an age of giants, an age when a ship's size and comfort said something about the confidence of the whole era. And it is here, in this world of steam and ambition and slow, patient crossings, that the story of a certain famous liner quietly begins, long before her keel ever touched the water of Belfast. Among the grandest of these steamship companies was Cunard, a British line that had spent years chasing something called the Blue Riband, an unofficial honor given to whichever ship crossed the Atlantic the fastest. In the years just before our story begins, Cunard had launched two remarkable sisters, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, both built for speed above all else, with powerful steam turbines that let them cut across the ocean in a little under 5 days. They were admired everywhere, celebrated in newspapers, and for a time they made Cunard feel unbeatable on the open water. But speed, however impressive, came with a certain restlessness. The engines that pushed those ships so quickly also made them hum and tremble in a way some passengers found tiring after several days at sea. Picture the deep, steady thrum of turbines running at full power, felt through the soles of your feet for 4 or 5 days straight. It was thrilling, but it was not always restful. And it was this very restlessness, this small gap between speed and true comfort, that another shipping company was about to notice and quietly decide to fill in an entirely different way. That other company was the White Star Line, and rather than compete with Cunard for speed, its leaders made a calm and deliberate choice to compete for comfort instead. If Cunard's ships were going to win the race across the water, White Star decided its ships would win something quieter but perhaps more lasting, the feeling of barely being at sea at all. The idea was simple to say and enormous to build. Construct ships so large, so heavy, and so steady that the ocean's usual roll and shudder would soften into something closer to stillness. Passengers would still cross the Atlantic in a matter of days, just not the very fastest days, but they would do it while dining in rooms modeled on grand English country houses, sleeping in cabins paneled with real wood, and strolling along decks so wide and calm they might forget, now and then, that there was an ocean beneath them at all. It was a gentle kind of ambition, size and steadiness over raw speed, and it would guide every decision White Star made about the 3 enormous sister ships it was about to plan. One of those 3 sisters, of course, is the very ship whose story carries you gently towards sleep tonight. The man steering White Star Line through this new chapter was named Joseph Bruce Ismay, the company's chairman, a tall and rather serious figure who had inherited the business from his father and now wanted to leave his own mark upon it. Ismay believed deeply in the vision of size and comfort over speed, and he surrounded himself with people who could help him build it, engineers, architects, and shipbuilders who shared his patience for getting every detail right rather than rushing toward a finish line. Around the same time, White Star had entered into a large financial partnership with an American shipping trust, which meant Ismay had access to enormous resources for whatever he chose to build next. He did not want merely a big ship. He wanted 3 of them, sisters in steel, each one meant to set a new standard for what an ocean crossing could feel like. All he needed now was a shipbuilder who could turn that quiet ambition into steel and rivets, and a place grand enough and skilled enough to build something the world had not quite seen before. That shipbuilder and that place were only a short conversation away. The story goes that one evening in the summer of 1907, Bruce Ismay had dinner at the London home of Lord William Purry, the chairman of the great Belfast shipbuilding firm Harland and Wolff. The 2 men were old friends as well as business partners, comfortable enough with each other to talk freely long after the meal was finished, and somewhere in that unhurried conversation, over coffee and quiet cigars, the idea of 3 sister ships began to take shape. Not sketches yet, not blueprints, just a shared picture in 2 men's minds of vessels larger and steadier than anything currently crossing the Atlantic. There is something rather lovely about imagining the largest moving objects human hands would ever build, beginning not in a shipyard at all, but in the soft lamplight of a dining room, sketched out loosely between friends who trusted each other's judgment completely. By the time Ismay's carriage carried him home that night, the outline of the plan was already settled in principle, even if every rivet and every deck still waited to be imagined. Within weeks, the conversation would move from that quiet dining room to the drawing offices of Belfast, where it would finally begin to take real shape on paper. From that dinner came a plan for 3 Olympic-class sister ships, so named for the first of the trio, which would be called simply Olympic. The second ship, larger and even more refined in her details, would carry the name Titanic. The third, though her story belongs to a later, quieter chapter of maritime history, would be named Britannic. Together, the 3 sisters were meant to command the Atlantic route for years to come, each one nearly identical in size and shape, yet each finished with her own particular touches below decks. Olympic was built first and launched first, becoming in many ways the test case, the ship whose construction taught Harland and Wolff's engineers everything they would apply and slightly improve when it came time to build her younger sister. Picture two vast steel hulls rising side by side in the same shipyard, close enough that workers moved between them during the day. Two great shapes slowly filling the Belfast sky before either one had even touched the water. Titanic was always meant to be the more refined of the two, a little heavier, a little more lavish, built with the benefit of everything her older sister had already taught the men constructing her. The shipyard chosen to build all three sisters was Harland and Wolff, a firm that had been building fine vessels in Belfast since the 1860s, and whose name was already trusted by shipping lines across Europe. By the early 1900s, the company employed thousands of skilled tradesmen, from platers and riveters to carpenters, electricians, and upholsterers, many of whom had spent their entire working lives mastering one small, specific part of how a great ship comes together. There was a quiet pride to the place, an understanding passed down from older workers to younger ones, that a ship built in Belfast was a ship built to last. When Lord Purry agreed to build the three Olympic-class sisters, he committed his yard to what was, at the time, simply the largest shipbuilding undertaking anyone had ever attempted. New slipways had to be prepared. New machinery had to be installed. Even the shape of the yard itself had to change to hold something this size. And so, before a single rivet was driven, Belfast itself had to grow a little, had to widen its shoulders to make room for the ships that were coming. Belfast at the turn of the century was a city built on two great industries, linen and shipbuilding, and the River Lagan ran through the middle of it like a quiet spine connecting both. Mills produced fine linen that traveled the world, while just downstream, the cranes and gantries of Harland and Wolff rose over the rooftops, visible from nearly anywhere in the city. For the thousands of families whose fathers, sons, and brothers walked to the shipyard gates each morning, the great ships being built there were not distant or abstract. They were part of daily life, glimpsed from kitchen windows, discussed over dinner, watched as they grew taller week by week. Children in Belfast grew up measuring the seasons partly by how much a new hull had grown since they last looked. There was something almost communal about it, an entire city quietly invested in watching steel become something enormous and graceful. When the keel of the second Olympic-class sister was finally laid in the yard, it was not only shipbuilders who noticed. It was the whole of Belfast, settling in for what everyone understood would be a long, careful, 3-year undertaking. It is worth pausing here, in these early planning years, simply to rest with how large an ambition this truly was. Nothing built by human hands up to that point had ever moved under its own power while carrying this much weight, this many people, this much cargo and coal and machinery all at once. Cathedrals were larger, certainly, and so were some bridges, but cathedrals and bridges stay still, rooted to the ground they were built on. These new ships would need to do something cathedrals never had to do: float, balance, and cross open ocean smoothly enough that a passenger could set a teacup down on a saucer and expect it to still be sitting there an hour later. Engineers had to think not just about strength, but about grace, about a kind of enormous gentleness. Picture, if you can, something as heavy as a small mountain of steel, designed so carefully that it could glide across open water without so much as spilling a drop from a glass. That was the quiet, almost impossible goal guiding every drawing, every calculation, every late night in the design offices above the Belfast shipyard. By the time construction was ready to begin, the ship had her name, and it is worth resting on that name for a moment before we watch her rise from the shipyard floor. She would be called simply Titanic, drawn from the Titans of old Greek stories, the great and powerful beings said to have come before the gods themselves. It was a name chosen to suggest strength and vast scale, nothing more than that, chosen the same unhurried way her sister Olympic had been named for the mountain of the gods. Once complete, she would also carry the letters RMS before her name, standing for Royal Mail Steamer, a designation given to ships under official contract to carry mail across the ocean for the British Postal Service, alongside their passengers and cargo. It was a mark of trust as much as function, a sign that this vessel was considered reliable enough to carry something as important as the post between two continents. With her name settled and her purpose defined, all that remained now was to actually build her, plank by plank, plate by plate, rivet by rivet, in the yard beside her older sister. And that slow, patient construction is exactly where we turn our attention next. Rest here a moment in this quiet age of drawing offices and dinner table dreams, before the steel and the noise begin. The plans are settled now, the name is chosen, and somewhere in Belfast a shipyard is already stirring. Let your body soften further into wherever you are lying, and drift with us toward the sound of rivets and cranes. With her name chosen and her plans approved, Titanic's story now moves from paper to steel. This is the part of the tale where a shipyard becomes almost a living thing, cranes swinging overhead, furnaces glowing through the night, thousands of hands shaping something too large to see all at once from any single angle. Settle in for the slow, patient work of building a giant, one plate, one rivet, one quiet season at a time, across 3 long years in Belfast. The keel of Titanic, the great steel spine upon which everything else would be built, was laid down in the Harland and Wolff shipyard on the 22nd of March in 1909, right beside the frame of her older sister Olympic. To support the construction of 2 such enormous vessels at once, the shipyard had built something almost as remarkable as the ships themselves. An enormous iron structure called the Aral Gantry, stretching high above both slipways like a covered bridge of steel latticework. It allowed cranes to move materials to any point along the growing hulls, sheltering the work below from Belfast's frequent rain. Workers arriving each morning would have walked beneath this towering gantry, small figures passing under a structure that must have felt like entering the ribs of some enormous sleeping creature. For the next 2 years, that gantry would shelter the slow, careful growth of a steel skeleton into something recognizably ship-shaped, frame by frame, deck by deck, rising a little higher every single week. It was, in its own quiet way, one of the largest workplaces on Earth, and it hummed steadily with the sound of a giant slowly being born. Building Titanic was not the work of days or weeks, but of years, roughly 3 of them from keel laying to completion, and it required a small army to do it. At the height of construction, around 3,000 men worked directly on Titanic and her sister ship, drawn from Belfast's deep well of shipbuilding talent, alongside many more thousands supporting them indirectly through supply and materials. There were platers who shaped the great steel sheets of the hull, riveters who worked in tight, noisy teams, joiners who carved and fitted wood paneling, and electricians threading wiring through decks that would eventually carry electric light to nearly every corner of the ship. Many of these men had fathers and grandfathers who had also worked in the Belfast yards, so a kind of inherited skill passed quietly from one generation to the next. Picture the shipyard at the change of a shift, thousands of men in flat caps and heavy boots streaming through the gates at once, their voices and footsteps rising and falling like a tide of their own. Slowly, steadily, through wind and rain and long working days, their combined effort turned drawings into something you could touch. Try for a moment to hold the size of this ship in your mind using only your own sense of distance. Titanic measured about 882 feet from bow to stern, which is roughly the length of 4 city blocks laid end to end, or nearly 3 American football fields placed one after another. She stood about 92 feet wide at her broadest point, and from the bottom of her keel to the top of her bridge, she rose more than 100 feet, taller than a 10-story building. Her 4 funnels alone, though not all of them carried smoke, stretched high enough above the deck that a person standing beneath one would have felt impossibly small looking up. Altogether fully loaded, she displaced more than 50,000 tons of water, an almost unimaginable figure that only really means something when you picture her gliding, slow and enormous, past a harbor wall while everyone on the dock tips their heads back to see the top of her. She was not simply a ship. She was closer to a small, floating town, complete and self-contained, drifting gently across the sea. Beneath her decks, Titanic's hull was built from thousands of individual steel plates, most of them around 6 feet wide and up to 30 feet long, each one rolled at a steel mill in England and shipped to Belfast by rail and sea. Shipwrights arranged these plates in overlapping rows along the ship's great steel frames, a pattern not unlike fish scales or roof tiles, designed so that the hull could flex ever so slightly in rough water without cracking. Each plate had to be heated, shaped, and drilled with careful precision, then hoisted into place by crane and held steady while riveters secured it permanently. It was slow, exacting work, repeated across a surface that, if you could somehow unroll the entire hull flat, would cover several acres of steel. And yet the tolerances mattered enormously. A plate set even slightly wrong could weaken the whole structure. So the men doing this work moved with a kind of unhurried care, checking, rechecking, in no rush despite the scale of what surrounded them, because a ship this size could only ever be as strong as its smallest, most carefully placed part. Perhaps the most famous detail of Titanic's construction is also one of the smallest, the rivets. Roughly 3 million of them held her steel plates together, each one a short metal pin hammered through matching holes, and then flattened on both ends to lock 2 plates firmly in place. Most of the ship's hull used rivets driven by hydraulic machines, powerful and precise, but in the tighter, more awkward spaces near the bow and stern, teams of workers drove rivets entirely by hand, a job that required real strength and rhythm. A typical hand-riveting squad worked as a tight team of 4, one to heat the rivet red-hot in a small portable forge, one to catch it in tongs and place it in the hole, and 2 more swinging heavy hammers in alternating, practiced blows. Multiply that single small motion by 3 million, spread across 3 years, and you begin to sense the sheer, patient repetition behind her construction. Picture the sound alone, a constant rhythmic clanging echoing across the yard from dawn until dusk, thousands of small impacts slowly, steadily binding an entire ship together, one warm metal pin at a time. Deep inside her hull, Titanic carried the machinery that would eventually push her across the ocean, and it was every bit as enormous as her exterior suggested. 29 boilers, fed by around 150 coal furnaces, produced the steam that powered 2 massive reciprocating engines, each one standing several stories tall within their own dedicated engine room. A third, smaller turbine used the leftover steam from the first two engines to turn a central propeller, wasting as little energy as possible. Keeping all of this running required a small city's worth of fuel. On a normal day at sea, Titanic burned through several hundred tons of coal, all of it shoveled by hand from the bunkers into the furnaces by teams of firemen working in relentless, sweltering heat. It is a strange, quiet contrast to hold in your mind. Far above, passengers strolling calm wooden decks in the fresh sea air, and far below, in a completely different world of heat and noise, men laboring in shifts around the clock simply to keep the great ship moving forward through the dark water. All of that steam and machinery eventually turned three enormous propellers at Titanic's stern, each one designed to work together to drive her forward through the water. The two outer propellers, called wing propellers, were driven directly by the great reciprocating engines and stood about 23 feet across, each blade taller than a grown man standing on another man's shoulders. The smaller center propeller, turned by the leftover steam turbine, added extra push without requiring any additional coal. Together at a comfortable cruising speed, these propellers could carry Titanic across the water at around 21 knots, fast enough to cross the Atlantic in about a week, though, as we already know, speed was never really the point of her design. Shipyard workers who helped cast and fit these propellers often spoke of them with a kind of quiet awe, aware that these curved bronze blades, each cast as a single enormous piece, would soon be doing their patient work far beneath the waterline, unseen by any passenger, yet essential to every mile the great ship traveled. Rising above her decks, Titanic's four funnels became her most recognizable feature, tall buff-colored cylinders capped in black, spaced evenly along her length. Only three of these funnels were actually connected to the boilers below and carried genuine smoke out to sea. The fourth, positioned toward the stern, was largely there for ventilation and, quite honestly, for appearance. Shipbuilders and designers of the era understood something about the psychology of size. Four funnels looked more powerful, more balanced, more reassuring than three, even if the fourth one did comparatively little work. Passengers of the time associated funnel count with a ship's power and prestige, so White Star made sure Titanic presented herself with the fullest, most impressive silhouette possible. Picture her from a distance, approaching a harbor, four dark-capped funnels standing in a confident row above her hull, smoke drifting from three of them into the sea air. It was an image designed quite deliberately to inspire trust in anyone watching from shore, a visual promise of steadiness and strength before a single passenger had even stepped aboard. On the 31st of May 1911, Titanic's hull, complete but still hollow and unfurnished, was ready to leave the shipyard floor for the very first time. Unlike many launches of the era, there was no bottle of champagne broken across her bow. White Star Line simply did not follow that particular tradition. Instead, workers coated the slipway in tons of soap, tallow, and train oil to help her enormous weight slide smoothly into the water. Crowds gathered along the harbor to watch, tens of thousands of people, some who had traveled a good distance simply to see her go. When the signal was given, hydraulic triggers released the restraints, and her hull began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed as gravity took hold, sliding down the greased slipway and settling into the water of the River Lagan in a little over a minute. It was a moment of pure spectacle, cheers rising from the crowd, tugboats waiting to guide her gently to the fitting-out wharf. She was not yet a finished ship, only a floating shell, but for the first time in her existence, Titanic was properly afloat. From her launch day until her final completion nearly a year later, Titanic spent this time at what shipbuilders call the fitting-out wharf, moored quietly while her interior slowly came to life. Engines were lowered into place through openings in her deck, funnels were hoisted and secured, and hundreds of skilled tradesmen moved through her empty spaces, laying wooden paneling, installing electrical wiring, hanging doors, and fitting the plumbing that would eventually serve thousands of passengers and crew. It was during this quieter, less dramatic phase of construction that the ship truly became herself, transforming from an enormous hollow steel shape into something with real rooms, real staircases, real detail. Furniture arrived by the wagon load. Carpets were rolled out and fitted. Chandeliers were hung with careful attention. By the early months of 1912, after roughly 3 years of patient work from that first keel plate to this final polish, Titanic was ready. All that remained was to test her at sea, take on her crew and supplies, and prepare her for the moment the whole world had been waiting for, her very first voyage. Let the noise of the shipyard fade now, the hammers and the cranes growing quieter and quieter, like a lullaby slowing at the end of a verse. She is whole now, waiting patiently at her wharf. Breathe out slowly and let us step inside her, through her grand doors, into the soft lamplight of the rooms she was so carefully given. Now the story slows down further, and we step through Titanic's doors into her interior, where 3 years of careful craftsmanship finally reveal themselves. Every room was designed to reassure, to soften, to make the vast ocean outside feel very far away. Let's wander together through her staircases and lounges, her baths and libraries, drifting from room to room the way a late-night guest might wander a grand, quiet house long after the other guests have gone to bed. At the very heart of the ship's first-class section stood her grand staircase, a sweeping structure of oak carved with soft, curling detail, rising through several decks beneath a great dome of wrought iron and glass. Sunlight, when there was any, fell softly through that glass dome and drifted down the stairwell in changing patterns throughout the day, while at night, electric light took over, glowing warmly against all that polished wood. At the foot of the staircase's uppermost landing stood a large ornamental clock, its face flanked by 2 bronze figures, one representing honor and the other glory, gently crowning time itself between them. Passengers making their way to dinner would descend this staircase slowly, almost ceremonially, pausing sometimes on the landings simply to look up at the dome above them. It was designed to feel less like part of a ship and more like the entrance hall of a great English manor house, complete and unhurried, and it remains, even now, the single image most people picture first when they think of Titanic at all: a wide, gentle stairway curving downward beneath soft, glowing glass. Beyond the staircase, Titanic's first-class passengers could wander through an entire sequence of grand public rooms, each one designed in a different historical style, as though she were a small, floating museum of English and French taste. The reception room welcomed guests before dinner in the soft, restrained elegance of the 18th century. The lounge, modeled after the Palace of Versailles, offered carved paneling and a marble fireplace where passengers might read or talk quietly over coffee. The smoking room, reserved mostly for the gentlemen aboard, was fitted in dark mahogany and stained glass, warm and hushed, the sort of room where conversation naturally dropped to a murmur. Even the writing room, a smaller and gentler space, was finished in soft white and gold, meant for letters home and quiet afternoons. Moving through these rooms in sequence felt something like walking through the rooms of a great historic house on land, except that everything, however still it felt, was quietly floating across the middle of the ocean, carried along beneath thousands of tons of steel and steam. One of the newest and most talked about additions aboard Titanic, a feature her older sister Olympic did not originally have, was the Café Parisien, a bright, airy room styled after a Parisian sidewalk café. Its walls were lined with trellis work and climbing ivy painted and carved to look almost real, and wicker chairs sat beside small round tables positioned along a row of tall windows looking out over the sea. It was meant to feel less formal than the grand dining saloon nearby, a place where passengers could enjoy a light meal or a cup of coffee in an atmosphere borrowed entirely from the cafes of the French capital. Waiters moved between the tables in the soft daylight pouring through the windows, and for a moment, if you let your eyes drift past the ivy and the wicker, you might almost forget you were at sea at all, several days from the nearest shore. It was a small, clever piece of design, borrowed from city life and folded gently into the middle of the ocean, and passengers who dined there often described it as their favorite room on the entire ship. Down on one of her lower decks, Titanic offered something few ships of her era could match: a full set of Turkish baths, along with a heated swimming pool, one of the very first ever installed on an ocean liner. The baths were arranged in a sequence of steam-filled rooms decorated with intricate blue and green tiles, carved wooden ceilings, and gently glowing lamps, designed to evoke the bathhouses of Cairo or Istanbul rather than anything you might expect aboard a ship. Guests moved slowly from warm rooms to hot rooms and back again, easing tired muscles after long days at sea, finishing with a cool plunge or a rest on a heated couch. Nearby, the swimming pool itself was filled with heated seawater, a genuine novelty at the time, open to first-class passengers at scheduled hours through the day. Picture stepping out of the cold, salt-heavy air on deck and descending into this warm, tiled, lamplit world below, steam curling gently through the quiet rooms, the sound of the ocean outside fading into nothing but a soft, distant hush. Just off one of the main promenade decks, Titanic kept a fully equipped gymnasium, another feature that felt remarkably modern for its time. Inside, passengers found mechanical rowing machines, stationary cycles, and perhaps most charmingly, mechanical horses and a mechanical camel, devices that jolted gently up and down to imitate the sensation of riding, all powered by simple electric motors. A dedicated instructor stood ready most hours of the day to guide passengers through their exercises, offering encouragement in the same unhurried, attentive manner as the rest of the crew. Children were occasionally allowed in during set hours, delighted by the strange mechanical animals rocking beneath them, while adults more often used the space for a brisk morning routine before breakfast. It was a small room, tucked just behind the bridge, with wide windows looking out over the front of the ship toward the open water ahead. Even here, in a room built for exercise and effort, the designers had made sure to include a view, so that no matter what a passenger was doing aboard Titanic, the sea was never very far from sight. Titanic's finest accommodations were her parlor suites, a small number of extraordinarily spacious first-class cabins that came, remarkably, with their own private promenade decks attached, small outdoor spaces reserved entirely for the occupants of that single suite. Inside, these rooms were finished in whatever historical style a passenger preferred, from delicate French designs to heavier, more masculine English paneling, complete with private bathrooms, sitting rooms, and in some cases connecting bedrooms for traveling families. Ordinary first-class cabins, while smaller, were still remarkably comfortable by the standards of the day, most featuring proper beds rather than built-in bunks, along with wardrobes, writing desks, and in many rooms their own wash basins with hot and cold running water. Stewards and stewardesses attended to each cabin personally throughout the voyage, tidying rooms, delivering meals, and tending to whatever a passenger might need. It was, in every sense, a version of home carried across the ocean, familiar comforts wrapped inside unfamiliar steel walls, so that even a passenger crossing for business rather than pleasure could still feel, each night, that they were retiring to a proper, well-kept room rather than a ship's cabin at all. Down in third class, the cabins were simpler, most holding 2, 4, or 6 berths arranged along narrow but clean corridors, without the private bathrooms or elaborate paneling found above. And yet, by the standards of transatlantic travel at the time, Titanic's third class was considered remarkably good, better in many respects than the first-class accommodations offered by some older, smaller ships still crossing the ocean. Bedding was fresh, the rooms were heated, and meals were served at set times in a shared dining room rather than passed around haphazardly as they often were on other liners. Many third-class passengers were emigrants leaving everything they knew behind, carrying what belongings they could manage, hopeful about whatever waited for them on the other side of the ocean. For many of these travelers, Titanic represented the most comfortable, most solid, most reassuring vessel they had ever set foot upon, a far cry from older, rougher ships that had carried previous waves of emigrants in far harsher conditions. There was real dignity built into even her most modest decks, a quiet signal that every passenger, regardless of the price of their ticket, was meant to feel decently cared for during the crossing. Each class aboard Titanic had its own library or reading room, quiet spaces set apart from the noise and movement of the rest of the ship, where passengers could settle into soft chairs with a book or a stack of writing paper. The first-class library, bright and calm, looked out over the sea through a row of tall windows, its shelves stocked with popular novels, reference volumes, and stationery bearing the ship's own letterhead for passengers writing letters to send home from the next port. Second-class passengers had their own smaller but comfortable library, similarly furnished, similarly quiet, tucked away from the busier public rooms nearby. Even third class had a general room that doubled as a gathering space and informal reading area, simpler in its furnishings, but no less welcome to the people who used it after a long day. These rooms rarely appear in dramatic retellings of Titanic's story, and yet they may capture her spirit better than almost anywhere else aboard. Ordinary people, sitting quietly with a book or a pen, the enormous ocean sliding past just beyond the glass, entirely unremarkable and entirely lovely all at once. Titanic's first-class dining saloon was, at the time she sailed, the largest room ever built aboard a ship, stretching the full width of the vessel and seating more than 500 guests at a single sitting. Finished in a soft, restrained English style with white paneled walls and large leaded windows, it could comfortably hold multiple courses served across a long, unhurried evening, with white-gloved stewards moving quietly between tables bearing silver trays. On the ship's very last full evening at sea, first-class passengers were served a meal of 10 courses, moving gently from oysters and soup through fish, meat, and game, all the way to a final selection of fruit, cheese, and coffee, a meal meant to last the better part of 3 unhurried hours. Second-class passengers dined nearly as well in their own saloon nearby, while third-class gathered in a simpler dining room for hearty, well-prepared meals served at set times. Whatever else was happening aboard the ship at any given hour, it seemed there was almost always a meal quietly underway somewhere within her, plates and glasses gently rattling in time with the distant, steady hum of her engines. Scattered throughout the ship were smaller touches that revealed just how thoroughly her designers had thought through every possible passenger interest. There was a squash racket court, complete with a small gallery for spectators, tucked down near the bottom of the ship where its walls could be built directly into her structure. There was a darkroom, available for the growing number of amateur photographers aboard who wished to develop their own film during the crossing. A barber shop offered haircuts, shaves, and souvenirs to remember the voyage by, while an internal telephone system allowed certain calls to be placed between different parts of the ship, a genuine novelty for the era. Even a small onboard hospital, staffed by 2 doctors, stood ready for anything from seasickness to more serious concerns. Taken together, these details suggest a ship built less like a simple means of transportation and more like a small, temporary town, complete with nearly everything its temporary citizens might need, all of it humming along quietly, invisibly, somewhere beneath the notice of most passengers enjoying their calm days at sea. Let your eyes rest now, the way a tired passenger's might, after wandering so many warm, lamplit rooms. There is nothing left to see tonight but soft carpets and closed doors, and somewhere above, the stars beginning to come out over calm water. Breathe out and let's go now to meet the people who filled these rooms with quiet life. A ship this size was never just steel and rooms. She was also, above everything else, the people who filled her. Over 2,000 souls would eventually come aboard for her first and only voyage, from the captain on her bridge to the youngest child in steerage. Let's meet a few of them now, drifting gently from the officers on watch down through her decks to the families and strangers who were about to share, without knowing it, one of the most remembered voyages in history. In command of Titanic stood Captain Edward John Smith, a calm, silver-bearded man in his 60s, who had spent more than 4 decades at sea, and had commanded nearly every major White Star liner before her. Passengers trusted him instinctively. Some wealthy travelers were even said to choose their crossing based on which ship he happened to be captaining that season, a habit that earned him the affectionate nickname, the Millionaire's Captain. By 1912, Smith had already announced his intention to retire, and Titanic's maiden voyage was meant to be his last before stepping away from the sea for good, a quiet, dignified final chapter to a long and well-respected career. He was known among his crews for a steady, unhurried manner, rarely raising his voice, trusted by the men who served under him as much as by the passengers who sailed with him. As Titanic prepared to leave port for the very first time, Smith walked her decks and bridge with the calm familiarity of a man who had done this 1,000 times before, entirely unaware of how differently this particular voyage would be remembered. Supporting Captain Smith on the bridge was a full team of experienced officers, each responsible for different parts of the ship's operation around the clock. Chief Officer Henry Wilder, First Officer William Murdoch, and Second Officer Charles Lightoller were among the most senior, each a capable seaman who had spent years working his way up through the ranks of the merchant service. These men took turns standing watch through the day and night, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, ensuring that someone experienced was always present on the bridge no matter the hour. William Murdoch, in particular, will return later in our story, since it was his watch, his eyes, and his steady hands on the wheel that met one particular quiet, star-filled night in the middle of the Atlantic. For now, though, imagine simply the calm routine of officers in dark uniforms moving between the bridge and the chart room, checking headings, watching the horizon, keeping the great ship steady on her course. Each one a small, quiet piece of the enormous, coordinated effort required to keep thousands of people safely moving across the ocean. Far below the decks where passengers strolled and dined, an entirely different world of work carried on around the clock. Nearly 300 firemen, trimmers, and engineers labored in shifts deep within the ship's boiler rooms, shoveling coal into roaring furnaces and wheeling it through narrow passageways from the coal bunkers to keep the fires fed. The heat down there was intense, often exceeding what most of us would consider bearable, and the work was relentless, physical, and largely unseen by anyone above. Trimmers had the particular task of keeping coal evenly distributed within the bunkers so the ship's balance stayed true, while engineers monitored gauges and machinery, adjusting pressure and flow with practiced precision. These men rarely appeared in first-class photographs or passenger diaries, and yet without their constant, steady labor, none of the elegance happening several decks above would have been possible at all. It is a quiet reminder worth holding on to. For every softly lit lounge and gentle string quartet aboard Titanic, there was a furnace room somewhere below, glowing orange, full of tired, capable men keeping the entire enormous machine alive. Tucked away in a small cabin near the officers' quarters sat Titanic's wireless room, staffed by two young Marconi Company employees named Jack Phillips and Harold Bride. Though they worked aboard the ship, they were technically employed not by White Star Line, but by the Marconi Company itself, which operated the wireless telegraph equipment as something closer to a postal and telegraph service for passengers willing to pay for the novelty of sending messages home mid-ocean. Phillips, the senior operator, had years of experience with wireless equipment, while Bride, younger and still learning the finer points of the trade, worked alongside him in a cabin barely large enough for the two of them and their humming, crackling machinery. Their job most of the voyage was cheerful and busy rather than dramatic, sending and receiving personal messages, stock prices, and social pleasantries for wealthy passengers eager to stay in touch with the shore. Neither man could have known, as they worked through stacks of routine messages that week, how important their small cabin and its crackling equipment were about to become before the voyage was through. Among Titanic's first-class passengers were some of the most recognizable names of the era. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in America, traveled with his young wife, returning home after months abroad. Benjamin Guggenheim, from the prominent mining family, was also aboard, as were Isidore and Ida Strauss, the elderly co-owner of a well-known New York department store and his devoted wife, rarely seen apart from one another in the ship's public rooms. There was also Margaret Brown, a lively, independent-minded Denver socialite who would later become known, rather fondly, as unsinkable, for reasons that belong to a later part of our story. These passengers occupied the grandest suites, dined at the captain's table, and represented in many ways the height of Gilded Age wealth and comfort, gathered together for a handful of days within the same warm, lamplit rooms. And yet, for all their fortune and fame, they shared the same slow evenings at sea as everyone else aboard, the same quiet decks, the same calm stars overhead each night. Second class aboard Titanic carried a rather different, though no less interesting, group of travelers. Teachers, clergymen, small business owners, engineers, and professionals of modest but comfortable means. Many crossing the Atlantic for work, family, or a long-planned visit rather than pure leisure. The accommodations here, while simpler than first class, were considered genuinely excellent, often compared favorably to the first-class cabins of older, smaller liners still crossing the ocean at the time. Passengers in second class enjoyed their own dining saloon, their own promenade deck, and their own library, all comfortable, all well kept, if a touch less lavish than the decks above them. There was a practical, grounded character to this part of the ship, filled with people building ordinary, steady lives rather than chasing headlines, many traveling with careful budgets and clear, modest purposes for their journey. If first class represented the glittering surface of the era, second class represented something closer to its steady, patient backbone, quietly comfortable, quietly dignified, going about its own unremarkable, entirely human business somewhere in the middle of the ship. Down in third class traveled the largest single group aboard Titanic, hopeful emigrants from Ireland, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and beyond, many crossing the Atlantic for the very first and only time in their lives, carrying everything they owned in trunks and cases stowed carefully beneath their bunks. For many of these travelers, a ticket aboard Titanic represented years of saving, a carefully planned leap toward a new life in America, where relatives or simple opportunity waited on the other side of the ocean. Families traveled together where they could, while many young men and women traveled alone, trusting the journey to carry them safely toward whatever came next. Despite the modesty of their accommodations compared to the decks above, there was a real sense of hope and forward motion in third class, a shared feeling among strangers who did not yet know one another but were bound, for these few days at least, by the same wide horizon and the same quiet, nervous excitement. Their stories, though far less documented than those of wealthier passengers, form the true, beating heart of who Titanic actually carried across the sea. Titanic carried her own ship's orchestra, 8 skilled musicians led by a violinist named Wallace Hartley, who had been playing professionally on ocean liners for several years before this particular voyage. The band was technically split into 2 smaller ensembles, a quintet that played in the first-class reception areas before dinner, and a trio that performed separately in the Café Parisien and à la carte restaurant, though they often combined for larger evening performances in the lounge. Their repertoire ranged from popular tunes and light classical pieces to the occasional waltz, providing a warm, familiar soundtrack to evenings that otherwise might have felt long and quiet so far from shore. Passengers gathered most nights to listen, some dancing, some simply resting in nearby armchairs with the music drifting pleasantly around them. Hartley and his fellow musicians were, in many ways, just doing their ordinary jobs that week, playing requests, reading the room, filling the ship's grand public spaces with warmth and gentle sound. Later in our story, this same small band will return once more, in circumstances none of them could have expected when they first tuned their instruments that week. Altogether, when you add up her passengers across all 3 classes and every member of her crew, Titanic carried somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,200 people on this particular voyage, though she had been designed with capacity for even more. It is a number almost too large to picture all at once, so instead, imagine it in smaller pieces. Several hundred first-class passengers in their grand cabins, several hundred more in second class, over 700 in third, and roughly 900 crew members keeping the entire vessel running smoothly around the clock, from officers on the bridge to stewards, cooks, engineers, and firemen far below. That is, in effect, a small floating town, larger than many villages of the era, entirely self-contained for the length of the crossing, complete with its own post office, its own hospital, its own shops, and its own daily rhythms. Every one of these people had their own reasons for being aboard that week, their own small stories folded quietly into the larger one, each of them simply going about an ordinary Atlantic crossing, unaware of how this particular voyage would eventually be remembered. Scattered throughout every class aboard Titanic were families with children, some traveling for a grand adventure, others simply relocating for a parent's new position abroad, others still emigrating together in search of a steadier life. In first class, a small number of children delighted in the ship's gymnasium and open decks, watched closely by nannies and governesses who traveled with their families. In third class, larger families with several children often shared bunks and small cabins together, the children finding their own quiet games and adventures in the corridors and open-deck spaces reserved for their class. Crew members occasionally recalled children's laughter echoing through certain stairwells during the crossing, a small, ordinary sound that carried easily through the ship's steel corridors. It is worth holding this image gently for a moment. A ship so often remembered for grand names and grand history also carried, quite simply, families very much like any you might know, parents watching over children, children chasing each other happily along a deck, all of them simply crossing the ocean together, the way families always have, under whatever stars happen to be out that particular week. Rest for a moment with all these quiet lives gathered together under one vast roof of steel. Officers on watch, engineers below, families settling in for the night. Let your own eyes grow heavy along with theirs, and when you're ready, we'll follow the ship down to the water's edge, to the morning she finally leaves port behind. On the morning of the 10th of April, 1912, Titanic finally left the shipyard behind for good, ready to meet the open ocean for the first time with passengers aboard. What followed was a gentle, unhurried gathering, port by port, of everyone who would sail with her. Let's follow her now out of Southampton, across the Channel, along the Irish coast, and finally out into the wide, open water where her story truly begins to unfold. At noon on the 10th of April, 1912, Titanic sounded her deep, resonant whistle and slowly pulled away from the dock at Southampton, England, beginning the very first voyage of her life. Crowds had gathered along the quay since early morning, families waving handkerchiefs, well-wishers calling out final goodbyes, photographers trying to capture the enormous hull sliding past. Many in the crowd were themselves connected to the ship in some way, relatives of crew members who called Southampton home, since a large portion of her staff had been recruited from the town itself. Tugboats eased her gently away from the dock and out into the channel of the River Test, her four funnels catching the pale spring sunlight as she moved. For the passengers standing at her rails, this first hour must have felt like the true beginning of the adventure, land slowly falling away behind them, replaced by open water and the steady, comforting hum of the engines beneath their feet. None of them yet knew that within minutes, this calm departure would very nearly end in an entirely different kind of incident altogether. As Titanic moved slowly through the narrow channel leaving Southampton, her sheer size created a powerful pull in the water around her, a phenomenon still not fully understood by most sailors of the time. Two smaller ships, including one called the New York, were moored nearby, and as Titanic passed, the suction from her displaced water dragged the New York's mooring ropes taut until they snapped, swinging her stern out into the channel directly toward Titanic's path. For a tense moment, a collision seemed almost certain, and passengers lining the rails watched with sudden alarm as the gap between the two ships narrowed to what some described as mere feet. Quick thinking from a nearby tugboat captain, along with a swift response from Titanic's own bridge, reduced her engine power just enough to lessen the pull, and the two ships slid past one another with barely any room to spare. It was a small, tense episode, resolved calmly and professionally, remembered afterward mostly as a curious footnote to an otherwise ordinary departure, a brief reminder of just how much water even the largest ship could quietly move simply by passing by. With Southampton behind her, Titanic crossed the English Channel that evening and arrived after dark off Cherbourg, France, though her size meant she could not actually dock at the harbor there. Instead, two smaller vessels built specifically for this purpose, named Nomadic and Traffic, ferried passengers and their luggage out to where Titanic waited at anchor in the darkness beyond the harbor. Lit from bow to stern with electric light, she must have looked almost unreal from the smaller tenders approaching her, a glowing steel wall rising higher and higher as passengers drew near. Among those boarding here were a number of wealthy American passengers returning home after a season in Europe, along with others simply beginning their own Atlantic crossing at this second stop. The transfer took a couple of hours in the cool evening air, boats moving back and forth between shore and ship, before Titanic raised her anchor once more and continued on into the night, now carrying a noticeably fuller passenger list than the one she had left Southampton with earlier that same day. By the following morning, the 11th of April, Titanic had reached her final port of call, Queenstown, on the southern coast of Ireland, a town now known as Cobb. As at Cherbourg, she anchored offshore while smaller tenders carried out the last passengers who would board her, along with sacks of mail bound for America. Queenstown had long been a farewell point for Irish emigrants leaving for new lives across the Atlantic, and so the harbor that morning carried a particular kind of bittersweet energy. Families gathered on the pier to send off sons and daughters they might not see again for years, if ever. A handful of local boats came alongside as well, some selling lace and local crafts to passengers leaning over the rails, others simply carrying curious onlookers eager for a closer look at the largest ship many of them had ever seen anchored off their coast. It would be the last green coastline anyone aboard would see for the remainder of the voyage, the hills of Ireland slowly fading into a soft afternoon haze as Titanic turned her bow west toward the open Atlantic at last. Among the passengers who boarded at Queenstown, one deserves particular mention, though his part in the story is a gentle rather than a dramatic one. Francis Brown, a young Jesuit seminarian with a passion for photography, had been given a first-class ticket as a gift and had already sailed with Titanic from Southampton to Queenstown, spending his short time aboard photographing nearly everything he saw. The grand staircase, the gymnasium, fellow passengers strolling the decks in the spring sunshine. At Queenstown, his onward journey ended, called back to his religious studies rather than continuing on to America, and so he left the ship with his camera and his rolls of film, carrying with him what would later become some of the very last photographs ever taken aboard the ship. Years afterward, when his collection was rediscovered, these calm, ordinary images of passengers at ease, of light falling through the ship's windows, became treasured historical records, quiet windows into a handful of contented days that most of the people photographed there could not have known were so nearly their final ones aboard her decks. In the early afternoon of the 11th of April, Titanic weighed anchor for the final time and turned her bow westward, leaving Queenstown and the coast of Europe entirely behind her. From this point forward, there would be no more ports, no more tenders, nothing ahead but open ocean until the shores of America finally appeared, still days away. Passengers who had spent the morning watching Ireland's green hills slip past now settled into the rhythm that would define the rest of their week at sea. Quiet mornings, long unhurried afternoons, evenings gathered in warm, lamplit rooms. For many aboard, especially the emigrants in third class, this moment carried real emotional weight, the last visible edge of the world they had always known finally disappearing below the horizon behind them. For others, it was simply the comfortable beginning of a pleasant week's crossing, nothing more dramatic than that. Either way, as the Irish coastline faded into a thin gray line and then into nothing at all, Titanic was, for the first time, entirely alone with the ocean, just as her designers had always imagined she would one day be. In these first full days at sea, passengers began to settle into the particular rhythm that only a ship this size could offer. Many remarked, in letters and diaries later recovered, on just how little Titanic seemed to move beneath them, how steady she felt compared to other ships they had crossed on before. It became something of a small, pleasant game among first-class passengers to test her stillness, balancing a coin on its edge along a polished table, or simply noticing how a cup of tea sat undisturbed on its saucer even as the ship pressed steadily forward through the swell. This steadiness was, of course, exactly what her designers had spent 3 careful years working toward, the entire point of choosing size and weight over raw speed. For passengers used to the shudder and roll of older, smaller liners, the sensation came as a genuine, quiet delight, a feeling less like crossing an ocean and more like relaxing inside an enormous, gently drifting hotel. It is, in its own way, very much the feeling this story hopes to offer you now, wherever you happen to be resting tonight. Titanic's officers had charted a course that, like most transatlantic liners of the season, curved slightly south before turning back northwest toward New York, a long-established route meant to keep ships clear of the ice that regularly drifted down from the Arctic each spring. The weather during these opening days remained calm and mild, with only the faintest breeze crossing her open decks, encouraging passengers to spend long stretches outdoors wrapped in blankets provided by attentive stewards. Officers on the bridge maintained their usual careful watch, checking their position against the stars each clear night, adjusting course only slightly as needed. There was nothing yet in these early days to suggest anything unusual about the voyage. If anything, passengers and crew alike seemed to agree it was shaping up to be a remarkably smooth, pleasant crossing, blessed with fair weather and calm seas. Letters written home during this stretch of the journey are full of small, contented observations, comfortable beds, excellent meals, easy company, the simple pleasures of a well-run ship moving steadily and confidently across a wide, cooperative ocean. There was, by most accounts, a genuine sense of occasion in the air throughout these early days, a shared awareness among nearly everyone aboard that they were part of something new. Newspapers before the voyage had covered Titanic's construction and launch extensively. So many passengers already knew, in broad terms, that they were sailing aboard the largest ship in the world, and there was a quiet pride in simply being able to say so. Strangers struck up conversations more easily than usual, drawn together by the shared novelty of the experience, comparing notes on the ship's remarkable size, her calm ride, her handsome public rooms. Children ran along her decks with an energy that seemed to delight rather than disturb the adults nearby, and evenings in the lounges filled easily with music, conversation, and card games among new acquaintances. It was, in short, a happy ship during these opening days, filled with the particular, easy warmth that settles over any group of strangers thrown together for a shared adventure. All of them, for now, simply enjoying an unusually smooth and pleasant crossing of the Atlantic. Each morning during the crossing, passengers in first and second class could pick up a small printed newspaper called the Atlantic Daily Bulletin, produced right there aboard the ship, using news items received overnight through the wireless room. It carried brief items of world news, stock market figures for interested businessmen, shipping notices, and even the day's dinner menu, all gathered, typeset, and printed within Titanic's own small onboard press before breakfast each morning. For passengers used to newspapers as a fixture of daily life on land, this small bulletin offered a quiet, comforting sense of continuity, proof that even in the middle of the ocean, the wider world had not entirely vanished from view. Reading it over morning coffee became its own small ritual for many aboard, a few quiet minutes with news from places they had left behind and news of places they were heading toward. It is a small, easily overlooked detail, and yet it captures something lovely about the whole voyage. However far from land she traveled, Titanic carried with her the steady, ordinary rhythms of daily life, printed fresh each morning, folded neatly, and left waiting beside the morning tea. Let the coastline you just imagined fade fully now, the way it did for them, into nothing but open water and a wide, quiet sky. There is nowhere left to go tonight but forward, gently, across calm seas. Rest here a moment longer, and then let's follow the ship into the easy, unhurried days that follow. The days that followed settled into an easy, comfortable rhythm, the kind that makes a long voyage feel shorter than it actually is. Meals, walks, quiet conversations, the occasional game of cards in the evening light. Let's spend a little time in these unhurried hours before the story turns toward its quieter, more serious night, because these ordinary days deserve to be remembered too, just as they were. Calm, pleasant, and entirely unaware of what waited ahead. Life aboard Titanic quickly settled into a comfortable daily rhythm, one that repeated itself gently from morning until night across the whole of the crossing. Passengers woke to stewards delivering morning tea or coffee, dressed unhurriedly, and made their way to breakfast in one of the ship's dining rooms before the late morning hours opened up for whatever each person preferred. Some walked laps around the promenade decks, wrapped warmly against the sea air, while others settled into deck chairs with blankets and books, watching the horizon shift ever so slowly as the ship moved steadily westward. Deck games filled many afternoons, ring toss and shuffleboard among them, played with the same unhurried good humor as everything else aboard. By late afternoon, many retired to their cabins to rest and dress for dinner, the day's main event, before an evening of music and conversation in the lounges. It was, in essence, the rhythm of a fine hotel rather than a ship, each day nearly indistinguishable from the last in the gentlest possible way, exactly as White Star Line had always intended her crossings to feel. Meals aboard Titanic were, for many passengers, the true centerpiece of each day, prepared by a kitchen staff of dozens working from an enormous, well-stocked pantry that included everything from fresh eggs and cream to fine wines and delicate pastries. First-class dinners typically ran to numerous courses: soup, fish, a main course of meat or game, followed by lighter dishes, dessert, and coffee, each course paired thoughtfully with its own wine where passengers wished it. Even second and third class ate remarkably well by the standards of the day, with hearty, well-prepared meals served at regular hours in their own dining rooms. The ship's kitchens worked from carefully planned menus printed fresh for each meal, offering passengers real choice rather than a single fixed dish. Behind the scenes, this required enormous coordination, refrigerated stores, precise timing, and a small army of cooks and stewards moving in careful synchrony through corridors and service stairways hidden from passenger view. From the outside, it looked effortless, plates arriving warm and beautifully presented, but underneath that calm surface ran the same quiet, tireless machinery that kept every other part of the ship running so smoothly. Titanic's open decks offered passengers in every class a place to walk, sit, and simply breathe the cold, clean sea air, each class enjoying its own designated stretch of outdoor space. First-class passengers strolled along a long, covered promenade lined with deck chairs, often rented for the length of the voyage and arranged neatly in rows facing the sea. Second-class passengers had their own smaller but still pleasant promenade toward the stern, while third-class passengers gathered on open deck space near the bow, often turned into an impromptu gathering spot for music, conversation, and games among the younger travelers. Wrapped in blankets provided by attentive stewards, passengers of every class could be found leaning against the railings for long stretches, simply watching the water slide past, or the occasional seabird trailing the ship far from any shore. It was, for many, one of the simplest and most memorable pleasures of the whole crossing, this unhurried time spent outdoors, the wide gray Atlantic stretching out in every direction, the ship beneath them so steady it barely seemed to move at all. Throughout each day, Titanic's wireless room stayed busy handling a steady stream of messages, both practical and personal, passed between the ship and shore stations or other vessels within range. Wealthy passengers used the service to send greetings, arrange business affairs, or simply announce their safe progress to relatives waiting in America, paying by the word for the novelty of communicating across such enormous distances. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride worked long hours keeping up with the volume, especially as the ship drew closer to the American coast and came within range of more shore stations eager to relay messages back and forth. Alongside these personal telegrams, the wireless room also received official communications, including, as the week went on, a growing number of messages from other ships reporting ice further along the shipping lanes ahead. For now, these messages were simply added to the ordinary flow of the day's business. Routine information passed calmly from one vessel to another, the sort of message wireless operators exchanged constantly that spring as ships crossed paths along the same well-traveled northern route. Tucked below decks, Titanic carried her own working post office, staffed by 5 postal clerks who spent their days sorting an enormous quantity of mail carried aboard for delivery once the ship reached New York. This was, in fact, the very reason she carried the designation RMS before her name, Royal Mail Steamer, an official contract with the British Postal Service to transport mail securely and reliably across the Atlantic. Sacks upon sacks of letters and parcels filled a dedicated sorting room, organized carefully by destination, the clerks working steadily each day to have everything ready for quick unloading upon arrival. It was quiet, unglamorous work, rarely noticed by passengers enjoying the decks and lounges above, and yet it mattered enormously to the thousands of families on both sides of the ocean waiting for letters, business documents, and parcels carried in Titanic's hold. In its own understated way, this small sorting room connected 2 continents just as surely as the wireless room above it did, one steady letter and parcel at a time, entirely unremarkable, entirely essential. As Titanic moved further west across the Atlantic, wireless messages from other ships began mentioning something worth noting, though not yet worth any real concern. Ice, drifting further south than usual for the season, scattered along parts of the shipping lanes ahead. This was not unusual news in itself. Every spring, ships crossing the North Atlantic exchanged similar reports as icebergs calved from Greenland's glaciers and drifted slowly into the shipping lanes with the current. Wireless operators aboard nearby vessels passed these reports along as a simple courtesy between ships, part of the ordinary, cooperative rhythm of Atlantic crossings during ice season. Officers on Titanic's bridge received and noted these early messages calmly, adjusting their attention rather than their course, the same way any experienced crew would respond to fairly routine seasonal reports. There was nothing yet in these early warnings to suggest anything other than an ordinary, well-managed feature of springtime sailing, the kind of information ships had exchanged for decades, calmly folded into the wider, easy rhythm of a mostly uneventful crossing. As each day gave way to evening, Titanic's public rooms filled with the warm, unhurried sound of conversation, laughter, and music drifting from the ship's small orchestra. Passengers gathered in the lounges after dinner, some settling into card games, others simply talking over coffee or a late drink, the electric lights glowing softly against polished wood paneling. Wallace Hartley and his fellow musicians moved between rooms depending on the evening, playing popular songs and gentle classical pieces that filled the spaces between conversations without ever demanding too much attention. For passengers traveling alone, these evenings offered an easy, low-pressure way to meet fellow travelers, striking up friendships that in some cases lasted well beyond the voyage itself. Even for families or those simply enjoying quiet time together, there was comfort in the familiar evening ritual, the same warm rooms, the same gentle music, night after night, blurring pleasantly into one another as the ship carried everyone steadily westward beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. On the morning of Sunday, the 14th of April, Captain Smith conducted a customary church service in the first-class dining saloon, a tradition observed aboard most passenger liners of the era regardless of denomination. Passengers from various backgrounds gathered together for hymns and prayers, the enormous room briefly transformed from a dining hall into something closer to a chapel, quiet and unhurried in the soft Sunday light. It was, by most accounts, a peaceful, ordinary morning, entirely fitting for what had so far been a peaceful, ordinary voyage. Afterward, passengers dispersed to their usual pursuits, walks on deck, quiet reading, letters written in preparation for arrival later that week in New York. Few, if any, aboard could have guessed, as hymns rose gently through the dining saloon that Sunday morning, that this same room and this same day would later be remembered so differently by history. For now, it was simply a calm, unremarkable Sunday at sea, one more peaceful page in an already peaceful week. As Sunday afternoon wore on, more wireless messages arrived from other ships in the area, each one adding a little more detail to the picture of ice scattered along the route ahead. A ship called the Caronia reported ice to the west. Later, the Baltic sent a similar warning. Through the afternoon and evening, several more vessels, including one called the Californian, added their own reports of ice sighted nearby. Officers on Titanic's bridge received these messages as they came in, and Captain Smith adjusted his understanding of conditions ahead accordingly, though the ship maintained her course and her comfortable speed through the calm afternoon. This was, again, well within the ordinary experience of April crossings on this particular route. Ice was a known, expected feature of the season, something officers were trained to watch for and navigate around rather than something that typically required drastic action. The day remained clear, calm, and pleasant on deck, passengers going about their usual unhurried Sunday activities, entirely unaware of the quiet accumulation of small, careful warnings gathering in the wireless room above them. By early evening, a noticeable chill had settled over the ship, sharp enough that passengers who had spent the afternoon comfortably on deck began retreating indoors earlier than usual, drawn toward the warm lounges and their glowing lamps. The temperature continued falling steadily as night approached, the kind of dry, clear cold that often accompanies a calm, cloudless sky at sea. Perhaps most notable, though few aboard would have thought much of it at the time, was just how still the ocean had become, the surface lying almost perfectly flat and smooth beneath a canopy of bright, clear stars. Sailors sometimes call such conditions a flat calm, and while it made for a beautifully still, quiet evening, it also meant the ocean gave up one of its more useful warning signs, the gentle white break of waves against any obstacle in the water. As passengers finished their evening meals and drifted toward the lounges for music and conversation, the sea outside grew colder, stiller, and darker, the ship gliding forward through conditions that were, in their own quiet way, gathering toward the night ahead. Let this calm, quiet evening settle over you now, the stars bright and still above a flat, glassy sea. Nothing here asks for worry, only your full attention, soft and unhurried, as the night deepens around the ship. Breathe out and let's stay with her a little longer, into the particular night, now known simply as April the 14th. This is the part of the story most people already know something about, so let's walk through it slowly, gently, and factually, exactly as it happened, without any rush and without any need for alarm. It was, in almost every way, a quiet night. Calm sea, clear sky, a ship moving steadily through the dark. Let's simply follow the hours as they passed, one calm, ordinary detail at a time, the way the officers themselves experienced them. Through the day and into the evening of April the 14th, Titanic's wireless room received a steady handful of messages from other ships describing ice along the shipping lanes ahead. The steamer Coronia had sent word of ice earlier that morning. Later, the Baltic reported field ice and icebergs in a similar area. In the evening, a ship called the Californian, only a short distance away, reported that she herself had stopped for the night, surrounded by loose ice. Another vessel, the Mesaba, sent a particularly detailed report describing a large region of ice directly across Titanic's path. These messages moved through the wireless room, along with dozens of ordinary personal telegrams that same busy evening, part of the same steady stream of information flowing in and out of that small, humming cabin. Officers on the bridge received the ice reports and passed the information along appropriately, adjusting their attention to the darkening sky ahead. It was, in the calm and orderly world of Atlantic shipping, simply one more evening of careful, routine communication between vessels sharing the same wide, quiet ocean. One detail about that particular night is worth sitting with a little longer, because it explains so much of what followed. The sea that night was extraordinarily calm, almost perfectly flat, with none of the usual gentle swell that ripples across open ocean even on the mildest of evenings. Sailors have a name for this rare condition, a flat calm when the water lies so still it can look, in the dark, almost like glass. Ordinarily, this would simply be a beautiful, peaceful sight, one more calm evening among many on a smooth crossing. But it also meant that the small, telltale sign lookouts usually relied on to spot icebergs at night, a thin ring of white water breaking gently against the base of the ice, was almost entirely absent. Without wind, without swell, an iceberg in the darkness could sit on the water as quietly and invisibly as a shadow, betraying its presence through nothing more than its own dark, silent bulk against an equally dark sea. It was, in other words, a beautiful night, and also a strangely difficult one for careful eyes to see clearly by. Adding to the quiet difficulty of that particular night, there was no moon at all, only a wide, clear sky scattered with an unusually bright field of stars. Several crew members later remarked on just how striking the stars looked that night, sharper and more numerous than usual, a soft, silvery light that nonetheless did very little to illuminate the flat, dark water ahead of the ship. Without moonlight to catch against any icebergs drifting nearby, the lookouts stationed high above the deck were left relying almost entirely on the human eye and the very edge of visibility itself. The air was cold and extremely clear, the kind of crisp, still night that feels almost peaceful to be out in, wrapped warmly on deck, looking up at a sky so full of stars it seemed close enough to touch. It is worth picturing that sky now, calm and glittering above a perfectly still sea, because it was against this quiet, beautiful backdrop, rather than any stormy or dramatic one, that the rest of this particular night would slowly unfold. High above the deck, in a small lookout platform called the Crow's Nest, two lookouts named Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stood watch through the cold night air, their job simply to scan the dark horizon ahead for anything unusual. It has often been noted that the pair had no binoculars with them that particular voyage. A set had been available earlier in the journey but ended up locked away, the key apparently misplaced during a last-minute crew reassignment back in Southampton. In practice, binoculars would have offered only limited help finding an iceberg on a moonless, calm night at that distance regardless, since unaided eyes scanning a wide horizon often catch sudden movement or shape more readily than a narrow, focused lens does. Still, Fleet and Lee stood their post with the same quiet diligence expected of any lookout, layered against the bitter cold, eyes moving steadily across the dark water ahead, trusting their training and their instincts in conditions that offered very little else to rely on that particular night. By the later hours of the evening, the cold had deepened considerably, sharp enough that several passengers still out on deck commented on it in letters and later accounts, remarking on just how suddenly the temperature seemed to have dropped as the night wore on. Crew members recalled the air feeling unusually dry and biting, the kind of cold that sailors sometimes associate with the presence of ice somewhere nearby, carried on currents of colder water beneath the ship. Most passengers, however, simply took the temperature as a signal to head indoors a little earlier than usual, retreating to the warmth of the lounges and their cabins rather than lingering on the open decks as they might have on a milder evening. By 11 o'clock, the promenades had grown quiet, most of the ship's public rooms holding only a handful of late guests finishing a last conversation or a final quiet drink before turning in. Above them, the lookouts remained at their post in the cold night air, watching the dark water ahead continue to slide past, calm and glassy, beneath that wide, star-filled sky. At around 20 minutes to midnight, Frederick Fleet, still watching from the Crow's Nest, noticed something ahead in the darkness, a shape rising darker than the night around it, low against the calm horizon. He rang the lookout bell 3 times, the signal for danger sighted directly ahead, and picked up the phone connecting the crow's nest to the bridge. When 6th Officer James Moody answered, Fleet spoke the words that have since become some of the most recorded in maritime history. "Iceberg right ahead." On the bridge, 1st Officer William Murdoch, who had the watch that night, immediately gave the order to turn the ship hard to one side and signaled the engine room to reverse the engines. A swift, practiced response carried out within seconds of the warning reaching him. Even at Titanic's comfortable cruising speed, though, a ship of her enormous size required real time and distance to change course, far more than the few hundred yards separating her from the shape now looming ahead in the calm, dark water. Every second from this point mattered enormously, even if, to most people elsewhere on the ship, this particular midnight still felt like any other. Murdoch's response that night was quick, calm, and entirely in keeping with his training, the same instinctive competence he had shown throughout years at sea. Hard at starboard, turning the ship's bow away from the danger ahead, combined with a full reversal of the engines to slow her forward motion as much as possible in the little time available. It is worth remembering just how enormous a task this really was. Bringing a 50,000-ton vessel to any kind of meaningful change in direction takes considerably longer than it does for a small boat, no matter how promptly her officers respond. Murdoch's actions, carried out within seconds of receiving Fleet's warning, very likely prevented what could have been a far more direct, head-on collision, turning what might have been a sudden violent impact into something quieter and more glancing instead. On the bridge, in the space of less than a minute, calm procedure and quick thinking did exactly what they were trained to do, even against a challenge as sudden and as difficult as this one. What followed in the very next moments would be felt very differently across different parts of the ship. At 11:40 that night, Titanic's starboard side met the iceberg, not in a sudden head-on crash, but in a long, glancing scrape along her hull beneath the waterline, largely hidden from view. Some passengers later described feeling a faint shudder, a slight grinding vibration passing through the floor or their cabin walls, while others, especially those already asleep or in the ship's lower decks, felt nothing distinct enough to wake them at all. Up on deck, a few passengers who happened to be outside that late reported seeing the iceberg itself glide past close along the ship's side, tall and pale in the darkness, close enough in some accounts that a little ice actually landed on the forward deck. There was no dramatic lurch, no loud crash echoing through the ship, nothing that immediately suggested anything more serious than a curious, minor event. Many who did notice something simply assumed the ship had lost a propeller blade or brushed against something minor, a passing curiosity rather than a cause for concern, exactly the kind of small, quiet moment that made what came next so difficult, at first, for anyone to fully believe. In the minutes immediately following the collision, the mood aboard remained remarkably calm, even mildly curious rather than alarmed. A handful of third-class passengers, whose cabins sat closer to where the iceberg had scraped along the hull, later described a stronger jolt and the odd sight of ice scattered along the forward well deck, prompting some brief, cheerful commotion as a few passengers gathered pieces of ice, genuinely delighted by the novelty of holding a piece of an iceberg in their hands. Up in the first-class lounges, many passengers barely noticed anything at all, continuing their card games and conversations undisturbed, while others simply asked a steward passing by what the odd vibration might have been, receiving calm, uncertain answers in return. There was, in these earliest minutes, no sense of danger anywhere aboard, no urgency in anyone's voice or movement, only a mild, passing curiosity about a strange, small bump in an otherwise perfectly smooth night. It would take a little more time and a great deal of quiet, careful work below decks before anyone aboard fully understood what that gentle shudder had actually meant. Captain Smith arrived on the bridge within moments of the collision, calmly gathering reports from his officers about what exactly had happened and where. Together with Thomas Andrews, the shipbuilder from Harland and Wolff, who had traveled aboard to observe the ship's first voyage firsthand, Smith began a careful inspection of the damage, moving quietly through the lower decks and cargo areas to assess exactly what the iceberg had done beneath the waterline. Andrews understood Titanic's design better than perhaps anyone else alive, having helped draft her original plans years before in Belfast, and it was his careful, practiced eye that would soon offer Captain Smith the clearest possible picture of what they were now facing. Their inspection was quiet and methodical, moving from compartment to compartment without commotion, checking mail rooms and cargo holds low in the ship where the first signs of trouble would appear. Whatever they found in these early, quiet minutes below decks, they carried it back to the bridge calmly, without alarm in their voices, exactly as two experienced, capable men would, even as the picture forming in front of them grew steadily more serious with each compartment they checked. Let's pause here for just a moment, breathing slowly, before we follow the ship through the rest of this particular night. What you are about to hear is handled gently, the way this story deserves, with care for everyone who was aboard. Rest easy and let's continue quietly into the hours that followed. What follows is the most serious part of tonight's story, and we will move through it slowly and gently, with care, the same way you might want a difficult chapter of history told to you late at night. This is a story about quiet courage more than anything else, about people doing their jobs, looking after one another, and staying steady in difficult circumstances. Let's walk through these hours together, softly, all the way to the calm morning that eventually followed. Having inspected the damage below, Thomas Andrews returned to Captain Smith with a careful, sobering assessment based on his intimate knowledge of the ship's design. Titanic had been built with a series of watertight compartments along her length, sealed by heavy doors that could close automatically, meant to contain flooding to just one or two sections in the event of damage. The trouble was that the iceberg's long, glancing scrape had opened several compartments at once, more than her design had ever been meant to handle, allowing water to rise steadily and spill from one sealed section into the next over the tops of the watertight walls. Andrews worked through the mathematics calmly and quietly with the captain, explaining, as gently as such news can ever be explained, that the ship's remaining time was now measured in a small number of hours rather than days. It was a difficult conversation, delivered quietly between two capable, experienced men, and from this point forward, the calm, ordinary rhythm of the voyage began to shift into something more serious, met, as we will see, with a great deal of quiet courage from nearly everyone involved. With Andrews' assessment in hand, Captain Smith gave the order to uncover the lifeboats and rouse the crew to their emergency stations, setting in motion the ship's practiced, if imperfect, safety procedures. Officers moved through the ship calmly, waking passengers and asking them to dress warmly and make their way to the boat deck, careful in these early minutes to avoid causing any unnecessary alarm. Many passengers, still unaware of the seriousness of the situation, dressed slowly, gathered small belongings, and made their way up through the ship's grand staircases with a sense of mild inconvenience rather than fear, some even joking about the disruption to their evening. Crew members worked steadily to release the canvas covers from each lifeboat and swing them out on their davits, ready for loading, a procedure that, though drilled in principle, had never actually been rehearsed at full scale with passengers before this night. It was the beginning of a long, careful process that would occupy the ship's remaining hours, crew and passengers alike working, mostly calmly, toward the boats now waiting along both sides of the boat deck. Here we must gently share one of the more difficult facts of this story. Titanic did not carry enough lifeboats for everyone aboard that night. She carried 20 boats in total, enough space for a little over half of the more than 2,000 people on board, a number that, troublingly, still met and even exceeded the safety regulations of the time. Those regulations had been written years earlier, based on a ship's overall size and tonnage rather than the number of passengers she might actually carry, and they had simply not kept pace with how large ships like Titanic had since become. It was a gap in the rules themselves rather than any single person's decision that night, a quiet failure of regulation that the whole shipping industry would soon be forced to examine and correct. In the moment on the boat deck, this meant careful, difficult choices had to be made quickly about who boarded the boats first. Choices that crew members approached, by nearly every account, with as much fairness and calm as the circumstances allowed. As the lifeboats began loading, officers on both sides of the ship worked to follow the long-standing maritime custom of the time: women and children first. On the port side, this rule was often followed quite strictly, while on the starboard side, officers allowed men to board more readily once nearby women and children already present had been seated. Around this same time, Wallace Hartley gathered his fellow musicians in the first-class lounge near the boat deck and began to play. A steady, familiar stream of music drifting out across the deck as passengers waited their turn or said quiet goodbyes to loved ones. Survivors later recalled this music as an enormous comfort during those uncertain hours, a small, steady thread of normalcy holding the atmosphere together even as the situation around them grew more serious. There was, in these early stages of loading, a great deal of quiet calm rather than panic, families embracing before separating into different boats, crew members speaking gently and firmly, doing everything they could to keep the process orderly, unhurried, and as reassuring as such an unprecedented night could possibly be made to feel. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride stayed steadily at their equipment throughout these hours, sending out distress calls again and again into the night, giving Titanic's position as clearly and precisely as they could to any ship that might hear them. They used both the older distress signal, CQD, and the newer call, SOS, still fairly uncommon at the time, alternating between them as they reached out across the dark ocean for any vessel within range. Several ships did hear the calls, most importantly the Cunard liner Carpathia, whose own wireless operator happened to still be awake and listening at just the right moment, and which immediately turned around and began steaming as quickly as she safely could toward Titanic's reported position. Phillips and Bride remained at their post long after most other duties aboard had been reassigned elsewhere, calm and focused, doing the steady, essential work of connecting the ship to any possible help out there in the dark, a quiet act of persistence that would matter enormously to everyone still waiting aboard. Aboard the Carpathia, roughly 58 miles away when the distress call reached her, Captain Arthur Rostron responded immediately and decisively, turning his ship around and ordering every possible increase in speed toward Titanic's position. He woke his crew, prepared blankets, hot drinks, and medical supplies for however many survivors they might find, and pushed his ship carefully, but urgently through the very same ice field that had caused the trouble in the first place, doubling the lookouts posted on deck to watch for danger along the way. It was a demanding, careful balance, moving as quickly as possible while still navigating safely through waters known to hold scattered ice, and Rostron and his crew managed it with real skill through the remaining hours of darkness. Carpathia would not arrive in time to prevent what was already unfolding, but her steady, determined approach through those same dark, ice-scattered waters represents one of the clearer threads of quiet competence and care running through this entire long night, one ship doing everything within her power to reach another. Through the growing seriousness of the night, Wallace Hartley and his small band continued playing, moving at some point from the warmth of the lounge out onto the boat deck itself, where the cold night air carried their music across the scene of ongoing, careful loading. Survivors accounts vary slightly on exactly which songs were played during these final hours, though many recalled a mixture of lively popular tunes and gentler, more familiar melodies. Chosen, it seemed, to keep spirits steady rather than to alarm anyone further. The musicians themselves, all professional men simply continuing to do their jobs with quiet dedication, remained at their instruments far longer than duty strictly required of them, a small act of steadiness that many survivors later spoke of with real gratitude. Their music became, in the memory of that night, one of its most enduring images of calm courage, ordinary men choosing to keep playing, keep the atmosphere as gentle as possible, for as long as they were able, asking nothing in return except to do their part well until the very end of their watch. Deep below decks, in the engine and boiler rooms, a large number of engineers, firemen, and electricians remained steadily at their posts throughout the night, working to keep the ship's electric lights and pumps running for as long as possible, even as water continued rising through the lower decks. This was quiet, essential, largely unseen work, carried out far from the boat deck and its lifeboats, by men who understood that every extra minute of light and power made the evacuation happening above them safer and more orderly. Thanks in large part to their steady effort, Titanic's lights remained lit for most of her final hours, allowing crew above to see clearly as they loaded boats and guided passengers through the ship's corridors and stairways. None of these men in the engine rooms are as widely remembered by name as some others from that night, and yet their quiet, disciplined persistence, choosing to stay at demanding, difficult work rather than seek the boats themselves, represents some of the clearest, steadiest courage found anywhere in this entire story. An entirely unglamorous kind of heroism performed calmly out of sight for the benefit of everyone else aboard. As the night wore on, the lifeboats were gradually loaded and lowered, one after another, into the calm, dark water below, carrying with them a little over half of the more than 2,000 people who had begun the evening aboard. Many passengers and crew, particularly among the men, remained aboard the ship until the very end, and in the ship's final hour, the atmosphere aboard shifted from careful procedure to a kind of quiet, resigned steadiness. People gathering together, some in prayer, some simply holding onto one another as the ship's bow settled ever deeper into the water. Titanic slipped beneath the surface in the very early hours of April the 15th, and many who remained aboard or who found themselves in the frigid water afterward were lost that night, a loss still remembered with great care and respect more than a century later. We will not linger on the details of that final hour, only on the truth of it, and on the quiet dignity so many aboard showed one another until the very end, a night remembered as much for its courage as for its sorrow. In the hours that followed, an extraordinary stillness settled over the same calm, star-filled water where, just hours earlier, a great ship had been steaming steadily toward New York. Survivors in the lifeboats waited quietly in the bitter cold, wrapped in whatever blankets or coats they had managed to bring, watching the same bright, unmoving stars overhead, listening to the gentle sound of oars dipping now and then into perfectly still water. Some boats drifted close together for comfort and safety, voices calling softly across the darkness to keep track of one another until daylight came. There was little to do now but wait, and so they waited, hour after cold hour, watching the horizon for any sign of the ship they knew was coming. It is worth resting here for a moment in this quiet, dark stretch of ocean, holding on to the thought that help was indeed already on its way, steaming steadily through the same calm water, carrying toward them, though they could not yet see her, the lights of the Carpathia. Let yourself rest here a while in this quiet, star-filled dark, knowing that morning and rescue are already on their way across the water. The hardest part of the story is behind us now. Breathe out slowly, and let's follow the first light of dawn as it finally reaches the boats. With dawn came rescue, and with rescue, slowly, the rest of the world began to learn what had happened during the night. This chapter moves a little more gently than the last, following the news as it traveled from ship to shore, from telegraph office to newspaper, from disbelief to grief to lasting change. It is, in its own way, a hopeful chapter, the story of how the world responded, and how it made sure such a night would be far less likely to happen again. Just before dawn on the morning of April the 15th, the lights of the Carpathia finally appeared on the horizon, drawing steadily closer to the scattered lifeboats waiting in the cold early light. Captain Rostron brought his ship carefully among the boats, and one by one, survivors were brought aboard by rope ladder, canvas sling, or simply lifted up the side by waiting crew members, exhausted, cold, and quiet after their long night on the water. Carpathia's own passengers, woken early by the unusual activity, gave up their cabins, blankets, and warm clothing without hesitation, and the ship's stewards moved steadily among the new arrivals with hot drinks and gentle reassurance. It took several hours to gather everyone from the scattered boats across the calm morning water, a slow, careful process handled with real tenderness by Rostron's crew. By the time the last boat had been emptied and hoisted aboard, the sun had risen fully over a becalmed sea, the same icebergs that had caused so much trouble now visible in the daylight, drifting pale and silent in the distance. When the counting was finally done aboard Carpathia, around 705 people had been rescued from Titanic's lifeboats, a number that, while a source of profound relief for those gathered safely on her decks, also made painfully clear just how many had not made it into a boat at all that night. Rostron organized his crew efficiently, arranging makeshift sleeping areas throughout the ship, distributing what clothing and supplies could be spared, and keeping a careful list of names as survivors were brought aboard, information that would soon become desperately important to families waiting anxiously on shore. A brief, simple religious service was held aboard Carpathia that morning, a quiet moment of gratitude and grief shared among survivors and crew alike. Rather than continuing on to her original destination, Rostron turned Carpathia back toward New York, now carrying a very different, much larger group of passengers than she had left port with days earlier, each one carrying their own quiet, private version of the same long night. For the next several days, as Carpathia steamed steadily toward New York, her wireless room became one of the most important small rooms in the world, carefully managing outgoing messages from survivors to anxious relatives, alongside a growing storm of incoming requests from newspapers desperate for any scrap of information. Harold Codam, Carpathia's own wireless operator, along with Titanic's own Harold Bride, who had survived and continued working despite injury, prioritized personal messages to families first, doing their best to bring some comfort amid the overwhelming volume of requests pouring in from every direction. Rostron limited outside communication where he could, wanting his crew's limited wireless capacity focused on survivor messages rather than press inquiries. A decision that frustrated newspapers eager for details, but one made with real compassion for the exhausted survivors aboard. Meanwhile, on land, incomplete and sometimes contradictory reports had already begun reaching newspaper offices, creating a strange, uncertain few days where the full truth of what happened was still slowly, carefully making its way across the ocean alongside the ship carrying the survivors themselves. On the evening of April the 18th, Carpathia finally arrived in New York Harbor, greeted not by the celebratory crowds that might normally welcome an ocean liner, but by tens of thousands of anxious, quiet onlookers gathered in the rain, many holding photographs, hoping desperately for news of a particular name. She docked first near where Titanic's own berth had been left waiting empty, lowering Titanic's own lifeboats, the only physical pieces of the great ship that had survived, before finally proceeding to her own pier. Survivors made their way slowly down into the crowd, met by relatives, reporters, and Red Cross volunteers offering food, dry clothing, and quiet assistance to those who needed it. The scene was solemn and hushed despite the enormous crowd, thousands of people standing quietly in the evening rain, watching for a familiar face among the survivors making their way down the gangway. It marked, in many ways, the true end of the physical journey that had begun over a week earlier in Southampton, even as the larger story of what had happened was only just beginning to be understood by the wider world. In the days between the sinking and Carpathia's arrival in New York, news of what had happened traveled slowly and unevenly, pieced together from fragmentary wireless messages relayed ship to ship and station to station across the Atlantic. Early newspaper reports, published before the full picture was clear, sometimes suggested Titanic had merely been damaged and was still afloat, being towed toward port under her own power. And for a short, painful time, some families believed their loved ones were simply delayed rather than lost. It took a couple of days for more complete, accurate information to reach shore stations, and from there, the newspapers, gradually replacing hopeful uncertainty with a clearer, harder truth. Once confirmed, the news spread with remarkable speed for the era, filling front pages across America, Britain, and beyond within a single day, a testament to just how closely the whole world had already been watching this particular ship since her launch the previous year. What had begun as a story of engineering triumph had, within the space of one long week, become something the entire world was now quietly absorbing together. The public reaction, once the full truth became clear, was one of widespread shock and genuine, shared mourning, felt not only in Britain and America, but across much of the world that had followed Titanic's story so closely. Newspapers published long lists of names, first-class passengers alongside crew members and third-class emigrants, a small but meaningful gesture that treated every lost name with the same careful attention, regardless of the ticket they had purchased. Memorial services were held in churches and town halls across Southampton, Belfast, New York, and countless smaller communities connected to passengers or crew. Entire towns pausing together to grieve people some of them had never personally met. Belfast in particular felt the loss deeply and personally, having built her with such evident pride only a year earlier. and Southampton lost so many crew members that whole streets of the city were left in mourning, entire neighborhoods touched by the same shared loss. It was, in the truest sense, a moment that drew a great many strangers together in quiet, collective grief, a feeling that still echoes, gently, whenever her story is told. In the weeks that followed, both the United States and Britain launched formal inquiries into exactly what had happened and why, hoping to understand clearly enough to prevent anything similar from happening again. The American inquiry, led by a United States senator, began within days of Carpathia's arrival in New York, questioning surviving officers, crew, and passengers about everything from the ice warnings to the lifeboat loading process. The British inquiry, led by a judge known as the Wreck Commissioner, followed shortly after, conducting its own thorough, methodical investigation back in London. Both inquiries worked carefully through enormous amounts of testimony, piecing together, hour by hour, almost everything we still know today about that particular night. Neither inquiry was interested in simple blame so much as clear understanding, and both ultimately produced detailed, practical recommendations aimed squarely at the future, rather than dwelling only on the past. It was slow, careful, methodical work, exactly the kind of steady attention such an important question deserved, and it laid the foundation for nearly everything that changed in ocean travel over the years that followed. Among the clearest and most immediate changes to come out of these inquiries was a complete overhaul of lifeboat regulations for passenger ships. No longer would the number of lifeboats be calculated from a ship's overall tonnage. From this point forward, every vessel was required to carry enough lifeboats and rafts for every single person aboard, passengers and crew alike, regardless of how large or modern the ship itself happened to be. Shipping lines across the world moved quickly to bring their existing fleets into compliance, adding new boats and davits to ships that, like Titanic, had previously carried far too few. It seems, in hindsight, like such a simple, obvious change, and yet it took this particular night, and the careful, patient work of these inquiries, to make it a firm and lasting rule rather than merely a suggestion. Every ocean liner that has crossed the Atlantic since carries this quiet legacy with her, a full complement of lifeboats for everyone aboard, a direct and lasting result of lessons learned from this one long, difficult night in the middle of the ocean. Two further changes followed close behind the new lifeboat rules, both aimed directly at some of the specific, quiet failures that had made this particular night so much harder than it needed to be. Ships were now required to keep their wireless rooms staffed around the clock, 24 hours a day, so that distress calls could never again go unheard simply because an operator happened to be off duty or asleep, as had very nearly happened aboard at least one nearby ship that night. Alongside this, an entirely new organization was created, the International Ice Patrol, tasked specifically with monitoring iceberg locations in the North Atlantic shipping lanes each season and broadcasting regular warnings to passing ships. Both changes were, in their own quiet way, direct answers to specific gaps this story had exposed, gaps that had seemed unremarkable right up until the moment they mattered enormously. Together, they represent the kind of careful, practical wisdom that so often follows difficult events, small adjustments made steadily afterward so that future ships and future passengers could cross these same waters just a little more safely. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of all emerged in 1914, when representatives from the major maritime nations gathered to sign the first International Safety of Life at Sea Convention, an agreement still known today by its abbreviation, SOLAS, and still, in updated form, governing ship safety standards across the entire world. It formally established many of the changes already underway: lifeboat requirements, radio watch rules, ice patrol funding, gathering them into one shared international standard rather than leaving each nation or shipping line to set its own separate rules. In the century since, SOLAS has been updated many times, expanded to cover countless new safety concerns as ships and technology have changed. Yet it still traces its origins directly back to the lessons so carefully gathered from this one particular voyage. It is, in its own quiet way, one of the gentler kinds of legacy a difficult story can leave behind. Not a monument, but a steady, ongoing framework of care, quietly protecting travelers who, more than 100 years later, may never even know her name. Let the busy noise of newspapers and inquiries fade now, all that urgency settling slowly into something calmer, something more like memory. The changes are made, the lessons are learned, and the world, in its own steady way, has moved gently onward. Rest a while longer, and let's follow the story down, softly, into the quiet deep where she rests today. For 73 years, no one knew exactly where Titanic rested, her precise location lost somewhere within a vast, dark stretch of the North Atlantic. This final chapter is the slowest of all, the gentlest, moving from the moment she was finally found down into the quiet world she now belongs to, and finally, softly, into memory itself. Let your body settle fully now, heavy and warm, as we drift down together into these last, quiet facts. For decades after that night in 1912, Titanic's exact resting place remained entirely unknown. Somewhere within a search area covering hundreds of square miles of open ocean, far too vast and far too deep for the technology of the time to properly explore. Various expeditions were proposed over the years, some serious, some fanciful, imagining everything from simple survey missions to elaborate schemes for raising the wreck back to the surface entirely. None of them succeeded, and through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Titanic remained exactly where she had settled that April night, entirely undisturbed, resting quietly in cold, dark water more than 2 miles beneath the surface. It was not until the technology of underwater exploration finally caught up with the scale of the challenge that a serious, well-equipped search became possible at all. And so, for a little over 70 years, the great ship simply rested in darkness, known to the entire world by name and by story, yet seen by no one, her precise location one of the ocean's more patient, well-kept secrets. In September of 1985, a joint American and French expedition led by the oceanographer Robert Ballard finally located Titanic's wreck. Using an unmanned deep-sea vehicle called Argo, towed slowly behind a research ship and equipped with cameras capable of withstanding the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Rather than searching directly for the hull itself, Ballard's team had the clever idea of instead searching for the long debris field a sinking ship of that size would likely have scattered across the ocean floor, a trail of smaller objects considerably easier to spot than one large shape in the dark. Early in the morning of September the 1st, monitors aboard the research ship suddenly filled with images of one of Titanic's massive boilers resting on the seabed, and the search team realized with quiet astonishment that after 73 years, they had finally found her. It was a moment of genuine, hushed wonder aboard the ship, scientists and crew gathering silently around the monitors, watching the first images of Titanic anyone had seen since that long-ago April night. The wreck itself, once properly surveyed, told its own quiet story about those final hours. Titanic had broken into two main sections as she sank, her bow and stern separating and settling onto the ocean floor about a third of a mile apart from one another, both sections resting upright in soft sediment roughly 2.5 miles, or about 4,000 meters, beneath the surface. The bow section remained remarkably recognizable, her hull and deck fittings still bearing a clear resemblance to photographs taken before her final voyage, while the stern section had suffered considerably more damage during its own long descent to the bottom. Scattered across the debris field between the two sections lay thousands of smaller objects, dishes, luggage, personal belongings, gently settled into the seabed over more than 7 decades of quiet undersea drift. It is a strange, still place down there, silent and dark and cold, utterly unlike the bright, busy ship she had once been, and yet unmistakably still her. In the years since her discovery, scientists studying the wreck have observed something quite remarkable happening slowly across her surface. Delicate, hanging formations of rust called rusticles, created by particular colonies of bacteria that feed on iron and have made a steady, patient home across much of Titanic's remaining steel. These rusticles hang and drip in slow, icicle-like formations, giving parts of the wreck an unusual, almost organic texture, as though the ship herself were being gently, gradually reclaimed by the ocean around her. Researchers estimate that these bacteria are steadily consuming her steel at a slow but measurable pace, meaning that, over the coming decades, more and more of Titanic's original structure will continue softening, settling, and eventually returning to the sea floor around her. There is something quietly moving in this process if you allow yourself to sit with it a while. A ship built with such determined human ambition, slowly, patiently being folded back into the ocean itself, becoming, bit by bit, simply another part of the deep, dark world she has rested in for so long. The world surrounding Titanic's wreck is one of near-total darkness, immense pressure, and near-freezing cold. A world utterly different from the warm, lit decks she once carried across the surface far above. And yet it is not an empty world. Deep-sea creatures drift slowly through the wreck's corridors and across her open decks, pale crabs, unusual fish, and other quiet inhabitants of the deep ocean who have long since made themselves entirely at home among her rusting steel. Submersible pilots visiting the wreck over the years have described an atmosphere that feels less unsettling than simply, profoundly still, a hushed, patient quiet found nowhere else on the surface world above. Beams of artificial light from visiting submersibles occasionally catch a passing fish or a slow, drifting current of sediment, brief small movements in an otherwise motionless scene. It is, in its own way, a peaceful place now, however unlikely that might once have seemed, home to a slow, steady rhythm of deep-sea life that carries on quietly, undisturbed around the great, resting shape of the ship. In the years following her discovery, a number of expeditions have carefully recovered thousands of artifacts from the debris field surrounding Titanic, taking great care to avoid disturbing the wreck itself out of respect for those who remain there. These recovered objects, ranging from dishware and personal items to a large section of her actual hull plating, have since been carefully cleaned, preserved, and put on display in museum exhibitions that have traveled to cities all around the world. Visitors to these exhibitions can see up close the same delicate china patterns once used in her dining saloons, perfume bottles still faintly scented after their long time underwater, and personal items that once belonged to real people with real names and real families. Conservators work slowly and patiently with these fragile objects, using specialized techniques to stabilize materials that spent decades in salt water before ever reaching the surface again. Each artifact, however small, offers a quiet, tangible connection back to that one particular ship and that one particular night, a small physical thread linking us directly back to her story. Beyond the traveling exhibitions of recovered artifacts, permanent memorials to Titanic can now be found in many of the cities most closely connected to her story. In Belfast, the city that built her, a striking museum called Titanic Belfast now stands on the very site of the old shipyard, its distinctive silver architecture rising not far from where her keel was first laid over a century ago. In Southampton, memorials honor the many crew members the city lost that night. Entire streets once touched directly by the tragedy now marked with quiet, permanent tributes. In Halifax, Canada, rows of simple grave markers remember passengers and crew whose bodies were recovered from the water in the days that followed, tended carefully still today by the local community. Together, these places offer something gentle and important. Physical spaces where her story can be remembered thoughtfully, respectfully, and in full, connecting the ship's grand ambition with the very real, very human cost carried alongside it, honoring both in the same quiet breath. Even now, more than a century later, descendants of both survivors and those who were lost continue to gather, research, and share the stories passed down to them through their families. Historical societies devoted to Titanic's story have connected thousands of these descendants with one another over the years, allowing family stories once kept quietly within individual households to be compared, documented, and preserved for future generations. Some descendants have visited Belfast, Southampton, or Halifax specifically to walk the same streets their ancestors once knew, while others have simply gathered family letters, tickets, and photographs into careful personal archives, treasuring small physical connections to relatives they never had the chance to meet themselves. There is something deeply human in this ongoing effort, this quiet determination to keep individual names and individual stories alive, rather than letting them dissolve into a single, simplified headline. Each name on every passenger list, when you look closely enough, still belongs to a family somewhere, still carries forward, generation by generation, in the careful, patient work of memory. Today, Titanic rests exactly where she settled that April morning, protected now as a maritime memorial site, her location marked but her structure left largely undisturbed within the vast, quiet dark of the North Atlantic. Modern expeditions studying the wreck do so carefully and respectfully, documenting her slow, ongoing changes rather than disturbing what remains, treating the entire site with the same quiet reverence one might offer any resting place. Above her, the surface of the ocean carries on exactly as it always has, ships crossing back and forth along routes not far from where she lies, sunlight and starlight alike playing across water that far below never receives either. There is something quietly comforting in imagining her there now, settled, still, cared for by the patient, steady presence of the ocean itself, safe from further disturbance, held gently within the same wide waters she was always meant to cross. She is no longer traveling anywhere. She has, in her own way, finally arrived, resting now in the deep, quiet keeping of the sea that has surrounded her ever since. And so we come to the end of her story, from a quiet dinner in London where 3 sister ships were first imagined, through 3 long years of rivets and steel in Belfast, through grand staircases and warm dining rooms, through calm days at sea and one particular still, star-filled night, through rescue and grief and quiet, lasting change, all the way down into the soft, dark rest she has known now for well over a century. She carried thousands of ordinary lives across the ocean, each one with its own hopes, its own small worries, its own quiet reasons for being aboard that week. And she carries their memory still gently within her rusted steel and her scattered, careful artifacts. There is nothing more to do with this story tonight except let it settle over you the way the ocean settled over her, softly, slowly, without any hurry at all. Wherever you are resting right now, let your body feel as still and as safe as the deep, quiet water that holds her. The night is calm. The story is complete. Sleep now. Good night. The ship rests now, and so can you. If you're still awake, know that there's nothing left to follow tonight, nothing left to remember, only the soft dark around you and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The sleepy universe will be here again tomorrow night, with another story to carry you gently towards sleep, another quiet corner of history to drift through together. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and let the rest of this night be exactly as calm and as still as the deep-water Titanic has called home for so long. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.